Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, Kwame Holman updates the Senate struggle with the nuclear test ban treaty. Margaret Warner looks at the ongoing troubles in and between Pakistan and India. Gwen Ifill with Jan Crawford Greenberg of the Chicago Tribune examine a states' rights argument before the Supreme Court today. Elizabeth Farnsworth talks to soprano Renee Fleming. And Spencer Michaels reminds us how Wilt Chamberlain played basketball. It all follows our summary of the news this Wednesday.
It took millions of years to create the world's oil supply and 150 years to deplete it. Who is helping to cut the world's need for oil with renewable energy sources?
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The Senate moved toward a vote tonight on the nuclear test ban treaty. Democrats failed to have it postponed. Minority Leader Daschle blamed some Republicans for forcing the vote by rejecting a compromise. Defeat seems certain. Majority Leader Lott has said he's comfortable going ahead with the vote, calling the pact fatally flawed. We'll have more on the story right after this news summary. On Pakistan today, Secretary of State Albright called for a return to constitutional democracy there. The military seized power from Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif yesterday. In Pakistan, army leaders today did not disclose any plans for ruling. Streets in the capital of Islamabad were calm. Government offices, banks, and the stock exchange were closed. In neighboring India, Prime Minister Vajpayee said his newly elected government was committed to dialogue with Pakistan, but he said Indian troops remained on high alert. We'll have more on this story later in the program tonight. Vice President Gore won the approval of organized labor today. The AFL-CIO meeting in Los Angeles officially endorsed him for president. He beat out his Democratic rival, former Senator Bill Bradley, who had sought to delay the Labor Federation's endorsement. Gore said this:
I want to work alongside all of you in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in every state. And from every member of this AFL-CIO and every official, I want to take this message right to the grassroots. I need every one of you to be with me, and I am not taking a single vote for granted. This is going to be a long, hard fight.
Not all of the AFL-CIO's 68 unions backed Gore. The Teamsters and United Auto Workers declined. They said it was too soon to decide. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today in an age discrimination case that touched on states' rights. The justices will decide whether a federal law infringes on a state's immunity against being sued in a federal court. We'll have more on the story later in our program tonight. Interior Secretary Babbitt has been cleared of criminal wrongdoing in an Indian casino investigation. The independent counsel investigating the matter said today there was insufficient evidence to indict Babbitt or anyone else. The case involved allegations Babbitt lied to Congress about why he refused to grant a gambling permit to 3 Wisconsin Indian tribes. Babbitt said in a statement he was gratified by today's decision. President Clinton issued an executive order today to protect 40 million acres of federally owned forest. He made the announcement in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. The plan would permanently preserve some 2/3 of America's canyon lands and forests from logging, mining, and other development. The president said it would not restrict the U.S. timber supply.
Only 5% of our country's timber comes from the national forest. Less than 5% of the national forest timber is now being cut in roadless areas. We can easily adjust our federal timber program to replace 5% of 5%, but we can never replace what we might destroy if we don't protect these 40 million acres.
But Republicans in Congress said it could put small loggers out of business.
The president has put 40 million acres of forest land at risk environmentally. And it may sound like a good thing, but unfortunately when you leave man out of the management of many of these forests, they'll overload with underbrush, and it makes them vulnerable to catastrophic fires, which occur regularly, especially in the West.
The Forest Service said it would aim to implement the preservation plan in the spring. On Wall Street today, the stock market slid for a second day in a row. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 184 points to close at 10,232. The NASDAQ index went down 71 points, more than 2%, to end the day at 2801. The nation's largest cigarette maker publicly acknowledged today tobacco is not safe. Philip Morris made its statement on its internet site. It admitted cigarette smoking is addictive and a likely cause of lung cancer, heart disease, and other health problems. A company spokesman said the website is part of a $100 million campaign to communicate more openly with the public. The Nobel Prize for Economics was won by a Columbia University professor today. He's Canadian-born economist Robert Mundell. He was cited for his analysis of how exchange rates affect monetary policies. The theories contributed to the creation of the euro, the European Union's single currency. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to a test ban treaty update, Pakistan and India, a Supreme Court argument, a conversation with opera star Renee Fleming, and a tribute to Wilt Chamberlain. The latest on the Senate and the nuclear test ban treaty from Kwame Holman.
Throughout the day on Capitol Hill, a small group of conservative Republicans held their ground and refused to agree to postpone a vote that was sure to defeat the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty.
You have to vote it down. You have to bring this up for ratification and reject it formally on the floor of this United States Senate. To do anything other than that is to leave it alive and to force us to comply with this flawed treaty.
Under Senate rules, it would take the unanimous consent of all 100 senators to remove the treaty from the Senate's schedule. Oklahoma's James Inhofe was one of 4 conservative Republicans who resisted, rejecting Minority Leader Tom Daschle's written promise he would not seek to reschedule a vote if Republicans agreed to put off the treaty for now. The firm position of those few Republicans drew the fire of Democrats.
Mr. President, this is a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. It makes no sense whatsoever for the United States Senate, in disregarding the views of the President of the United States, to bring up the comprehensive test ban treaty knowing it's going to fail.
If we defeat this treaty this afternoon, as it appears we are headed to do, it could be one of the most irresponsible acts ever by the United States Senate.
Democratic supporters of the test ban treaty were far short of the 67 votes needed to ratify the treaty, but they still had one last procedural motion available to them. Since the Senate put aside the treaty last night in order to debate an agriculture spending bill, a simple majority of 51 senators was needed to resume debate on the treaty. Consequently, the Senate's 45 Democrats needed only 6 Republicans to prevent that from happening.
Mr. President, I now move that the Senate resume executive session in order to resume consideration of the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty as provided.
Late this afternoon, once the agriculture bill had been approved, Majority Leader Trent Lott did in fact request that the Senate resume debate on the test ban treaty. The Senate proceeded to vote on Lott's request.
Mr. Ashcroft. Mr. Baucus.
Over the past few days, several Republicans, including Armed Services Committee Chairman John Warner, had recommended that the test ban treaty vote be delayed to be considered at another time.
Mr. Warner, Mr. Wellstone.
But this afternoon, given the chance to join Democrats in preventing the treaty from being brought back to the floor, none of those Republicans took it.
On this vote, the yeas are 55, the nays are 45, and the motion is agreed to.
With that straight party line vote, the Senate resumed debate on the test ban treaty.
Mr. President, I cannot vote today either to approve or to reject the ratification of the comprehensive test ban treaty. I will do something that I have never before done on the Senate floor in my 41 years in the United States Senate. I will vote present. I will do so in the hope that this treaty will sometime be returned for consideration under a different set of circumstances in which we can fully and dispassionately explore the ramifications of the treaty and any amendments, conditions, reservations, or statements in regard to it.
Nevertheless, a vote certain to kill the treaty is expected later tonight.
A military coup in Pakistan, a new government in India. Our coverage of these nuclear neighbors begins with a report from Cyrus Shah of Independent Television News.
A day after Pakistan's army seized power, the cricket continued in Islamabad. There's little sense of anxiety in the capital, except perhaps at the score. 18 hours earlier, in a seamless operation it said they planned weeks ago, troops were taking over the television station and government buildings. The country's new ruler addressed the nation.
Dear brothers and sisters, your armed forces have never and shall never let you down, inshallah. We shall preserve the integrity and sovereignty of our country to the last drop of our blood. I request you all to remain calm and support your armed forces in the re-establishment of order to pave the way for a prosperous future for Pakistan.
Voters have watched the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif become the most potent in Pakistan's history as he curbed powers of the judiciary, president and parliament. When he finally took on the army, it stepped in. Today, the government was on hold. The army declared a bank holiday, and with peculiar tact, there may have been fewer soldiers on the streets than at any time in Pakistan's history. Little groups of curious Pakistanis gathered outside the empty parliament to argue about who's ruling them. Look, there's a flag on top of the parliament. It's martial law, he says. No, it can't be, they say. We've still got a president. This is the most dramatic military intervention since General Zia al-Haq seized power in 1977. Pakistan still lives under his shadow, but now even the country's democratic opposition thinks the country's moved on.
General Pervez Musharraf has not proclaimed martial law. He has not proclaimed himself as Chief Martial Law Administrator. Civil liberties have not been curbed. Political parties have not been banned. So in that sense, it is a qualitatively different military intervention than the one which was done by late Zia.
This evening, the army postponed a promised statement on its plans for the future, which may include martial law or an interim government or even new elections.
And to Margaret Warner.
And for more on the coup in Pakistan and its implications, we turn to Shahid Hussain, a former World Bank vice president who served as special advisor to the Pakistani government in 1976-77. Mansour Ijaz, an investment banker and nuclear physicist, his father was a founder of the Pakistani nuclear program. And two American citizens born in India, Pranay Gupte, editor of the Earth Times and a columnist for Newsweek International, and Sumit Ganguly, a visiting fellow at Stanford University specializing in regional security in South Asia. Mr. Ijaz, there have been all kinds of descriptions about General Musharraf. What can you tell us about him?
Well, he's a professional soldier. I think he's a man who has a relatively hawkish stance when it comes to foreign affairs, particularly vis-a-vis India. I don't think he cares too much about how the American government views what he has done in Pakistan. But I think he is well respected, and he represents sort of the last of the class of professional soldiers that are running the Pakistan Army today. It's very important for the viewers to understand one thing about Pakistan's Army, and that is that there has been a slow creep of what I would call the urban middle-class Islamists, if you will, people that have a more of an Islamic mindset. And I think part of what he was dealing with before the Kashmir problems occurred this summer was presiding over an army that may have been
about
the Kargil problem and so forth.
The guerrillas that went into the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir.
Exactly. And
supported by the Pakistanis.
Exactly. And I think he was presiding over an army that was beginning to show signs of fracturing internally, and part of the reason for going up to Kargil was to give them a rationale and a raison d'etre, if you will, to exist in terms of what they were doing.
And of course, the now deposed prime minister ordered him to pull back.
Yes.
Yes.
With consequences.
What would you add to that in terms of General Musharraf, what drives him, what he's about?
I have met General Musharraf socially, and I know that in his group of army officers, he has been regarded as the brightest.
As the brightest?
As the brightest. He belongs to a generation of people which has seen a steady decline of Pakistan society, economy, institutions, and above all, tremendous amount of political corruption. To the extent that a large number of Pakistanis and foreigners think that Pakistan is a failing state. And Musharraf, like many others in the army, are intensely patriotic. They have sat and watched the decline and decay of our system, political system, economic system. And my guess is that this has been a fundamental motivation in what he has done.
Do you think, Mr. Ijaz, that, I know you said you don't think that he cares much what the West thinks of what he's done, but this was a democratically elected government. Do you think that was a difficult hurdle for him to get over? Do you think that, for instance, he has not imposed martial law, as somebody in the tape piece noted, which means he hasn't suspended parliament or constitutional government. What does that tell you about?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about what democracy is. Democracy is representation by the people, number one. In Pakistan's last 3 elections, no more than 17% of the total population has voted. And you have a and at that the elections are effectively bought off at the polling booths with graft monies that are taken each time one of these corrupt leaders comes into the turnstile. So I don't think that anyone can rationally argue that Pakistan is a democratic state in that sense. So that hurdle I don't think existed in his mind. The hurdle that probably did exist is that the military has become increasingly reticent in recent years to interfere in civilian affairs, to try and let a government serve out a full term in office. The trouble is that Nawaz Sharif chose this as a point in time, and why we still don't know, to interfere in the internal politics of the army. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back in this particular case.
And so, Mr. Hussain, what do you think he's likely to do next? As, again, I think the piece pointed out, he's got a number of options, from a pure military government to a sort of government of technocrats that's military-backed, to really just an interim government and quick elections.
My own view is that a quick election with the same cast of characters, Nawaz Sharif, Benazir Bhutto, others, would lead to more of the same. And I think there is a large majority of people in Pakistan who don't want that. They would like to see a period of reform and reconstruction and accountability, 2 to 3 years, in which basically you go and let the judicial system bring to justice people who have robbed the treasury, who have been responsible for massive corruption. These include the 2 major leaders, Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto. Reconstruction of institutions which have decayed. So it may take 2 or 3 years. And if Musharraf does these things, I think he will have support of the people.
All right, Mr. Ganguly in New York, now General Musharraf has quite a reputation in India as well, does he not?
He does indeed, and particularly he's seen in India, rightly or wrongly, as the principal person responsible for the Kargil fiasco of this summer, when Pakistani troops supported Islamic guerrillas, the Mujahideen, to make incursions at 3 places in Kargil, Batalik, and Dras at altitudes of about 14,000 feet, and occupied significant portions of territory. And in a television interview, I believe with the BBC, at one point later, once this misadventure had gone awry, he actually admitted that the Pakistani military had conducted what he referred to, and I quote, as aggressive patrolling, unquote, and as a consequence thereof may have crossed into Indian territory. This is about the closest admission that he made that the Pakistani troops had actually intruded into what India deems to be its territory, or at least is the territory subject to an international dispute. So he's not exactly held in particularly high stead in India, though he's seen as someone who is a potential troublemaker and possibly a fairly formidable adversary.
So, Mr. Gupte, does this lead people in India, or does it lead you to think that Pakistan is we're going to see renewed and perhaps more aggressive sort of hostilities between the 2 countries in a military sense?
Margaret, I don't know about the renewed hostilities. I think the military would have to be a little concerned in Pakistan to take on India again. what would be the benefit? Would they really expect to take over Indian territory? My concern really would be if I were in the military in Pakistan, that concern would have to do with how the world perceives me as a failed state. For 50 years now, or 52 years, Pakistan has shown itself totally incapable of running itself, totally incapable of developing instruments of good governance, totally incapable of turning out leaders who could run this country in the modern, I think, enlightened fashion that the world community expects. That's what I would be concerned about, even though I may be a commander seizing power from a civilian.
But Mr. Ijaz said in his view, this government really probably won't care what the West thinks. Can it afford not to?
Oh, of course it's going to have to afford what the West thinks. I mean, after all, it depends on the West. Pakistan is a creature primarily of the United States. It's a creature of aid. Each year to this day, it gets something like $600 million in foreign aid from the Scandinavians, from a variety of multilateral sources, such as the World Bank, UN agencies. It gets technical aid. Of course it cares. It also cares because irrespective of what the world's perceptions are, the fact is that any government in Pakistan has to deal with social issues. Education, for example, only 25% of women in Pakistan, and we're talking about a population of what, 150 million people, only 25% of women, who represent more than 50% of that population, are literate. Now, this is 52 years after independence. One other point, Margaret, that, you know, something like 60% of Pakistan's population is under the age of 25. For them, there are no adequate jobs. Think of the rising expectations. Think of the kinds of promises that the government will have to meet and keep.
All right, let me get Mr. Ganguly back in here. Go back to the relationship with India and also the fact that both these countries now have nuclear arsenals, and India also has a newly re-elected government. I mean, what do you anticipate in terms of the relationship between the two countries?
Well, the Indians, I think, are going to act with extreme circumspection in all senses of that word, in the sense that they are not about to, again, offer another olive branch to the Pakistanis anytime in the foreseeable future, because the so-called Lahore process, which was a meeting of the two prime ministers, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, whose party has again come back after a fairly resounding victory, when Mr. Vajpayee actually went to Lahore to meet with Mr. Sharif in the wake of the nuclear tests to diffuse international concern about the possibilities of yet another Indo-Pakistani war. And there's a real sense, and I think I can understand why this sense would exist, of injured innocence in New Delhi, that here we offered Pakistan the olive branch, and then what befell us but this crisis in Kargil, that we were literally not only stabbed in the back, but stabbed very directly in the chest.
Mr. Ijaz, do you think that not only India, but the rest of the world has to be concerned about either renewed or intensified hostilities between India and Pakistan, and or the control of a nuclear arsenal in Pakistan?
On the nuclear arsenal front, I don't think so. I mean, it's the nuclear arsenal has, by and large, always been under the control of the army in Pakistan, and the political leaders that country has have had some say in how things would manifest themselves in that regard, but not very much. Number two is that it's important for everyone to remember that this Kargil operation was approved by the Prime Minister. This was a politically approved operation. It is the Army's job in Pakistan to suggest these kinds of operations every year. That's what they do. And this year, for the first time since a civilian government was elected in Pakistan, the Prime Minister finally approved one of these. Why did he do that? He did that because the Islamists in the streets were trying to look for some sort of satisfaction from a government in which they had no representation in Parliament. 75% of the vote was his, and he could do whatever he wanted.
So you mean you're saying you don't think India really needs to be concerned that General Musharraf has tremendously hostile designs?
I think that General Musharraf is most concerned right now about getting Pakistan's internal house in order. And I don't think he's going to go and play any games up in Kargil or any other part of Kashmir right away. I just don't think that's in the cards.
Briefly, Mr. Hussain, do you agree with that?
I agree with that. In fact, I should like to remind the audience that the decision to explode nuclear devices in Pakistan and India, both were made by political governments, not by military governments. And the best relationship between Pakistan and India was in the times of General Zia-ul-Haq between 1977 and 88.
During a military government.
During military government.
All right. Thank you all four very much.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, today at the Supreme Court, Renee Fleming, opera singer, and Wilt Chamberlain, basketball player. Glenn Eiffel has the Supreme Court story.
The Supreme Court today heard arguments in 3 related age discrimination cases from 2 states, all posing the same question. Do public employees have the right to sue state governments for violations of federal law? 36 professors and librarians, a senior corrections officer in Florida, as well as 2 professors from Alabama say yes.
Okay, this is before the Gates transformation.
The lead suit, brought by current and former employees of Florida State and Florida International Universities, argues that schools didn't move quickly enough to close gaps in pay between older and younger workers. Senior professors and librarians earned less than younger faculty members hired more recently at higher market-driven salaries. One of the plaintiffs in that suit, Daniel Kimmel, a physics professor at Florida State University, has been teaching there since 1966.
I'm not a real expert on the law, but I'm very, very hopeful after hearing this case that what will be found is the states will not be able to discriminate against people without some accountability through the law. My feeling about it is that something involved with something as sensitive as discrimination should be something that's reached on a national consensus with a federal law, and to my feeling is that something like that should be dealt with a federal law rather than state law.
But lawyers for state employers said allowing such suits would violate states' constitutional rights.
The freedom you would be repealing in this instance is the whole notion that the federal government is one of limited and enumerated powers. The federal government, it's worth noting, does not allow federal employees to bring state law claims under state law in state court against the federal government. That seems to me to be the exact same position we've got here.
The case will be decided before the court's current term ends next summer. For more on the court's activities today, we turn to NewsHour regular Jan Crawford Greenberg, National Legal Affairs correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. Jan, the court has generally ruled that when there's a conflict between the states and the federal government, that the states win. How did that play out today?
Well, the justices picked up right where they left off last term with a theme they've become increasingly passionate about, and suggested that, once again, perhaps Congress went a little too far in imposing its will on the states and authorizing private citizens to sue states under federal law.
In this case, how does that apply? Is it age discrimination law?
That's right. At issue is a federal age discrimination law, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And as the piece mentioned, several professors and faculty members sued under that law, maintaining that the state had discriminated against them. Now, the states responded in the lower courts that they were immune from these kinds of suits under the Constitution's 11th Amendment.
What is the 11th Amendment?
The 11th Amendment once was thought to be a pretty obscure amendment that protected states from lawsuits in federal court. And Congress had been able to get around it and impose laws on the states. But the Supreme Court, has in recent years made it more difficult for Congress to get around the 11th Amendment. And in this case, the lower court said the 11th Amendment prohibited these private lawsuits under the Federal Age Discrimination Act. And that's what the Supreme Court took up today.
So the real question here is who has the power to make these laws and to enforce these laws, the federal government or the states?
Well, right. This, at the bottom, this is a case about power. Congress's power over the states, Congress's power to interpret the Constitution, perhaps in ways that the Supreme Court would not.
This is not the only example of that this term. We have heard the 5-4 conservative, liberal, however you want to split it up, members of the court have always sided with the states. But this is not the only case where we're going to see this played out.
No, this is the first of 4 cases that the court already has scheduled this term. And the other cases raise ask important questions about the scope of Congress's authority to get involved in areas that the states have traditionally been concerned with. For example, one of the laws that the court will review later this term involves the Federal Violence Against Women Act. The states argue that the law prohibits or allows victims of gender-based discrimination to sue their attackers. And the states say, look, this is an area of the law that we should have responsibility for, and Congress should just butt out. So the court will take up some of those issues, and today is just the first.
The court almost seems to have a little bit of disdain toward the way Congress has acted in a lot of these cases. But what is the practical effect if, say, the court were to decide that you cannot sue your state government under federal statutes on something like age discrimination? What would happen?
Well, I mean, in the short term, the immediate impact it answers a pretty simple question, and that's, will the 3 million or so older state employees across the country be able to turn to federal law and sue if they believe the state has discriminated against them based on their age? But as you said, I mean, the impact of today's case could be much broader, and it touches on a host of complex issues that get to issues of congressional power, and it could affect numerous other federal discrimination statutes, fair housing laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Equal Pay Act. So the stakes are incredibly high.
As a result, was it a vigorous argument today or a lot of questioning?
It was. I mean, the justices were very engaged, but it was a very intellectual argument because these are, as I said, I mean, very complex issues, though, as today's case shows, with very real-life consequences. And I think that some of the splits became evident at the argument today. Some of the more conservative justices, Justices Scalia, the Chief Justice, expressed concern that the Congress had gone too far, that they lacked the power to impose these private lawsuits on states.
And we always watch Justices O'Connor and Kennedy to see where they're going to go. Where do they seem to be leaning?
They as well raised questions about the authority of Congress to pass this law. Justice O'Connor made the point, don't states have these laws? I thought that states had their own anti-discrimination laws. Isn't that true? And the lawyers were forced to concede, yes, states have their own discrimination laws that they are bound by, but a lawyer for the Justice Department today said that sometimes those laws are very weak.
Now, this would have never reached the court if it had been about if it had been about race or sex discrimination, because they're explicitly protected in the Constitution.
Well, some people would say, and that's why they're so closely watching this case, that they're just not sure how far the court is going to take this issue. But yes, I mean, Justice Scalia today said, look, race is really not what we're talking about here. We have always said that race is entitled to heightened protection under the Constitution, and therefore Congress is justified when it comes in and tries to enforce anti-discrimination provisions under the Constitution's 14th Amendment and hold the states accountable. So, right, I mean, race seems to be off the table. Sex, the court has never put on the same level as race. It's maybe a little lower than race. But the lawyer for the states today suggested that sex would not be affected as well.
Speaking of accountability, if you are a state employer who feels that you have a grievance under age discrimination law, and the court were to say, no, you can't get any kind of relief because of the federal law, where do you go?
Well, that's the lawyers today, particularly the lawyer for the states, were careful to stress that you could still sue under your own state law, that all 50 states prohibit age discrimination, and they include themselves in those prohibitions. And you still could also look to this federal law. For example, you could sue the state official in charge of, your department to stop the discriminatory behavior, or the federal government could step in and sue on behalf of the workers in maybe terms of a class action. Lawyers for the employees say those remedies just aren't enough. The AARP, which has filed a brief in this case, emphasizes that some of the laws are very weak. For example, the federal law gives you the right to a jury trial that might be a more favorable reception for your claims, where state laws don't always do that.
As it stands, are there state laws which apply to this in all 50 states?
Yes, there are. The lawyer for the state said yes, and he made that point very clear today. And in fact, he said, look, states, when Congress amended this act in 1974, presumably to include the states, half the states had those laws in place at that time. He said that was evidence that Congress should not be doing this, that it needed to stay out of it because states could handle it, and there was no evidence that states were going out and discriminating against its employees anyway. A lawyer for the Justice Department today said no, the fact that states have these laws on the books shows congressional action is necessary. Private citizens should be able to turn to federal law to sue the states.
Thanks a lot, Jan.
Now the life and career of a top opera soprano. Spencer Michaels begins our story.
Renee Fleming has become one of the world's most sought-after sopranos. At the San Francisco Opera, she recently performed the title role in a new production of Louise by French composer Gustave Charpentier. It's a 100-year-old work whose highlight is Fleming's solo, Depuis le jour. The critic for the San Francisco Chronicle called Fleming's performance heartfelt and heavenly. Fleming is praised regularly for her warm, seamless, lyric soprano voice, sometimes described as creamy silver. She is often called the diva without a diva's temperament, easy to work with, funny, and warm. She balances her demanding role as an international opera star with her duties as a recently separated single mother of 2 young daughters. Fleming says she was a shoo-in for a musical career, since both her parents were music teachers who pushed her to perform as a child. She grew up talking music at the dinner table every night in Rochester, New York, and sang a lot of jazz while attending college. She still listens to jazz and recently recorded some tunes by Duke Ellington.
Do nothing till you hear from me. Pay no attention to what's said.
But it is the world of opera, with its passionate fans and harsh critics who grade her every note, where Renee Fleming shines. Last season in San Francisco, she played Blanche Dubois in Andre Previn's new opera, Streetcar Named Desire, a performance shown on public television. Fleming hopes to take Streetcar to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, where last year she performed in Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. That performance will be shown on PBS stations this December. Her popularity is high. She and mezzo Cecilia Bartoli are ranked as the top-selling soprano CD artists in the world.
How are you?
At this autograph session, adoring fans bought her new best-selling CD, in which she sings heroines in operas by Richard Strauss.
I gotta tell you, after Louise the other night, I was on such a cloud for so long, the next day they were still trying to pull me down.
Oh, good. Where'd you come from?
Kansas City.
Oh, my goodness. We're not in Kansas anymore.
Her voice is incredible. What she does is she floats her high notes, and that's very different from a lot of the sopranos, which really hit it strong just to show that they can, you know, pull off that high note.
My last days on earth, when I have her standing over my deathbed, singing an aria for me, that would be a happy way to die.
Fleming won a Grammy Award this year for her CD, The Beautiful Voice, and has won numerous other prizes. After leaving San Francisco, Fleming performs in Chicago, Rochester, Quebec, and at a New Year's Eve gala at the Met in New York.
And Elizabeth Farnsworth talked with Renee Fleming recently at San Francisco's War Memorial Opera House.
Renee Fleming, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let's start with Depuis le jour, the aria from Louise. The day I saw you perform, the audience loved this aria. There were many, many bravas, much applause. They were very enthusiastic. What were you trying to achieve with it, and what were the key difficulties that you faced?
The aria is so beautiful and so sensual. It's the only set piece in the entire opera. No other character has an aria. So in a way, there's a lot of pressure, because that's the moment that a lot of people in the audience are familiar with and the one that they're waiting for. And it's a quite difficult aria as well.
Tell me specifically, why is it difficult?
Well, vocally speaking, it has a very high tessitura. And the tessitura that's an Italian word which means where it lies, which you would say where the average range of the piece is. And it sits up there, and then there are these pianissimi, which is, all of the things that are risk-taking in opera are the things that are the most exciting. It's the tenor's high C, it's the soprano's high C, it's the high soft notes. These are the things that make opera thrilling, that make the human voice thrilling to hear under these circumstances.
Can you tell us specifically something about it that you really had to work hard to perfect?
Well, maintaining that range comfortably is difficult, and the very end, I have to say, is not an easy approach. It's got a big, wonderful, long high note that everybody waits for at the end. Part of the problem is that it's very exposed, and singing exposed means that there's not a lot of accompaniment. You're basically out on your own. It's a very naked kind of a feeling, because you think, wow, if I crack, or if the tone isn't right or the pitch isn't right, everyone will hear it. And of course, the difficulty in opera is that everyone in the audience has performances of the last 100 years in their ears that they're comparing us with. I'm being compared with 20 other sopranos who've sung this role. Unlike a pop singer who can come up with original material and not be compared to anybody.
It's really like baseball. I was thinking about this as I watched the opera, in that baseball players are there with all this history behind them, and they remember when a shortstop played this way. It's a little like baseball.
Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same. And we're doing the same moves. It's the same high note. And everyone's memory, of course, is extraordinarily generous to the past. And I think that's human nature, too, the golden ages. And there have been phenomenal singers.
You've said that you don't consider yourself, quote, one of those singers blessed with a natural technique. What did you mean, and how did you get so good if you didn't have a natural technique?
Well, what it means, I had a phenomenal upbringing, musically speaking, because my parents were both high school vocal music teachers. And as a result, I performed a lot at a very early age. And what happened to me then in my late teens was that I was singing with a very mature sound, too mature perhaps for my age. So I had to unlearn and relearn a lot of things that I had been doing basically naturally. And I couldn't, for instance, sing high naturally. I couldn't even sing above the staff. I had to learn that. I couldn't sing soft. I couldn't sing with ease. I had a lot of tension. So I'm very lucky. I'm grateful for this, in retrospect at the time.
Wait, stop a minute. What do you mean? What did you have to learn? What did you have to do to the muscles in your voice to do that? That's what I think people probably don't understand, and I certainly don't.
Well, we barely understand it, and the reason why is because the muscles we use to sing are all involuntary. So everything we learn about singing has to do with imagery, and think that think that you're singing low when you're actually singing high. Think that you're driving the sound to the back of the house. No, not driving, leading the sound to the back of the house. It's so much about imagery and it can be supported by physiology, but it's an extraordinarily intangible thing.
Because you're actually forcing these muscles to do things that they wouldn't naturally do? Is that what's happening?
I think singing, when it's done well, is extremely natural. It feels great. I think singing is one of the most natural things that human beings do. But it's difficult. What we're doing is so cultivated. It's such a sophisticated form of singing. We have to be able to sing for 3 hours without amplification. We are now the only singers in the world, and certainly in the Western world, who perform without amplification. And I wish people would remember that. We are the power lifters, I think, of singing. We have to have enormous strength, enormous stamina. It's 3 hours long without a microphone. Give me any of the pop divas, and I will tell you they're going to have a hard time with that. It's difficult.
Is harming your voice an ever-present danger? And how do you keep from harming your voice?
It is one of the largest fears that we live with, because there are so many singers who are enormous stars one day and they disappear the next, and their voices are gone seemingly irreparably, and nobody really knows why. It's a mystery. And even now, we can only guess. Maria Callas is the most famous example of a great singer, perhaps, and some say the greatest singer of the century, who had a phenomenal career one day, and really, practically overnight, at a very young age, her voice went into decline. And some people say it was because she lost so much weight so quickly. Some people say it was because of her emotional distress. It was because perhaps that her technique wasn't balanced enough to deal with both of those other issues at the same time. And we only guess. We can only guess. We can't, it's not like a tennis player who has tendinitis and can go be treated by a doctor.
Can you show us something here that will help us understand, for example, how you protect your voice, what kind of exercises you do?
Well, anytime I'm preparing for a performance or even rehearsal, it's as if, in a way, like any other athlete, these are muscles that support the vocal cords, which are just, I believe, cartilage, and it demands a kind of constant warming up and a constant feeling of where's the voice today. For instance, I might start with a lot of scales. And I'll do these on different vowels and try to get the tongue warmed up and the jaw and get everything going. And then this whole thing, which allows me to have dynamic control, and all of these things are based on kind of an Italian school of singing, because we use Italian words, a mezzo di voce, which is where the voice starts very softly, it gets bigger and gets soft again. And to do all kinds of crazy things. People would listen. I mean, some of them you sound like a siren, you know. It's just to kind of get everything lined up. And it's a very internal kind of a process. You have to kind of feel your way. Every day's different. The body's different every day. But it's enormously intuitive, along with the training that you have in order to keep your vocal health. And it's kind of precarious.
Speaking of the pressures, how do you have a family life and perform the schedule you're performing? You're very busy. You're very much, you've said that you're booked for, what, 5 years? Yeah. How do you manage to have a normal life at the same time?
Well, the biggest challenge is really the balance issue. I mean, when you say 5 years, we're literally scheduling performances for me. We're thinking in terms of 2004, you know, which is difficult. I mean, if you can imagine trying to figure out what it is you'd be doing on a day 5 or 6 years in advance, it's a skill that I certainly haven't acquired yet. It's a work in progress. And, you know, as far as the family goes, it's worked out phenomenally in the past, because my daughters have been on the road with me since the beginning. And because I mainly sang opera, and we had the opportunity to make a home for 6 weeks in whatever city I was in, we were very comfortable with that. Now, of course, that they're in school, it's a challenge.
And what about this issue? So many people say you're very nice for a diva, that you're very easy to get along with. Is this something you've had to work on? Did you work on it because divas have in the past had reputations for being difficult?
You know, it's funny, because that's something that a lot of people expect from an opera singer. And all I can say is I am the person that I am. I have not changed with the accomplishments. I've remained the same. If I had changed, great, you know, but I haven't. And I really think that diva is on the stage. And Leontine Price said to me recently, and I love her, and I admire her singing so much, she said, "This is diva." And she said, diva is what's in your throat and what it does to people in the audience. If they're moved by it, then you're a diva.
And finally, is the jazz singing that you do, whatever opera singing, non-opera singing you do, is it a relief? Is it a way to break some of the tension?
Oh, yes. Because, you know, it's my hobby. I call me a dilettante. I love jazz. I love it as an art form. I think it's underrated in this country. It's our music. It belongs to Americans, unlike most of the Western European music that I sing. And I just adore it. I listen to it all the time. And I'm very excited to be cooking up a terrific jazz project, so people can hear that side of what I do as well.
Well, Renee Fleming, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
An FYI note about our friend Elizabeth Farnsworth. She's still very much with the NewsHour as a senior correspondent based in San Francisco. Only her duties have changed somewhat. At her request, she will do less daily news interviewing and more long-term projects, including things like Renee Fleming interviews, and also she'll be doing some reporting from overseas. And finally tonight, remembering basketball star Wilt Chamberlain, who died yesterday in Los Angeles. Again, Spencer Michaels reports.
He was called the Big Dipper, in part for his signature move, maneuvering over and around his defender, then gently laying the ball into the basket. He was also basketball's first celebrated dunker, slamming the ball with force over his opponents. At 7 feet 1 and 275 pounds, though some people said he weighed more, Wilt Chamberlain was an unstoppable giant. By some accounts, he was the most dominant basketball player ever.
I think he's the only Superman for sure to ever play in the NBA, a guy that could go out and do what he wanted to do.
Chamberlain was so invincible that pro basketball changed the rules, widening the lane near the basket, for example, to make it more difficult for a big man like him to score. Sports writers nicknamed him Wilt the Stilt, a name he detested. Wilton Norman Chamberlain grew up in Philadelphia, played basketball at Overbrook High, and attended the University of Kansas for 3 years, where he starred on the basketball team. He left to spend 1 year, 1958, with the Harlem Globetrotters. Then, over the next 14 years, he played for 3 NBA teams. First, the Philadelphia Warriors, who later moved to San Francisco. Then the Philadelphia 76ers, a team he led to an NBA championship in 1967. And finally for the LA Lakers, the team he was on for his second championship in 1972. He had the highest scoring average in a season, 50 points per game, grabbed the most career rebounds, almost 24,000. And he was one of 2 players, along with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, to score 30,000 career points. Astonishingly, in more than 1,000 games, the Big Dipper never fouled out. Basketball fans loved the rivalry between Chamberlain and the Boston Celtics' Bill Russell. Today, Russell called Chamberlain the greatest offensive player he'd ever seen and said the fierceness of the competition bonded us as friends for eternity. Chamberlain had mixed feelings about his own career, in which his teams won just 2 NBA championships. He said he was disappointed that some people viewed him as a loser. And on his size, he said, nobody roots for Goliath. A highlight of his career was the 100-point game he had in 1962. In his last interview, recorded in April, Chamberlain spoke of that magical game against the New York Knicks.
The magic only started to happen when I got into the 70s. And when I got to the 70s, everybody in the stands, which is 4,000 some odd people, which were a lot of people back in those days in that arena, you understand, started chanting, "We won 100."
Chamberlain remembered falling asleep while riding home after the game with some New York Knicks players.
I kind of wake up and I can hear them saying, "Can you believe that SOB got 100 points against us?" And the whole conversation for 2.5 hours with them calling me these names about, "Can you believe that SOB got 100 points against us?" So finally they dropped me off at my house first, and I get out of the car. I said, "Hey, fellas, thanks for the lift, and I'm so sorry about that 100 points."
He retired in 1973 and entered the Hall of Fame 5 years later. By then, parts of the NBA record book were essentially his personal scrapbook. Chamberlain received a lot of attention for his 1991 biography in which he bragged of his sexual exploits, a boast he said later he regretted. But on the court, his legacy is indisputable.
There will never be anybody like it. They always say that about Michael. They always say that about other players. But there will never, ever be another Wilt Chamberlain.
It's just mind-boggling the things that he accomplished, especially as an individual, aside from winning the championship. When you look at some of the records and things that he did, I don't think they'll ever be duplicated.
Yesterday, Wilt Chamberlain died at his Los Angeles home, possibly of a heart attack. He had been diagnosed with an irregular heartbeat. He was 63 years old.
Again, the major stories of this Wednesday. The Senate moved toward a vote on the nuclear test ban treaty. Democrats failed to have it postponed. Defeat seems certain. And the AFL-CIO officially endorsed Vice President Gore for president. A follow-up before we go. On Monday, Paul Salmon reported on a gambling vote in Alabama. The governor wanted a state lottery to help fund education, but church groups and others were against it, and the proposal was rejected by voters yesterday by an 8-point margin. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Imagine a system that produces and distributes food and helps improve nutrition and health here and abroad. Who is building such a global network?
And by Solomon Smith Barney.
Will we ever say, fill her up with hydrogen? One thing's for sure, opportunities abound. Solomon Smith Barney, success is earned.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.